Today on The Pulse, we have a powerful and provocative interview with former Philadelphia Eagle and current NFL executive Troy Vincent. He shares his stories about domestic violence and his advocacy to make sure the world ultimately is a better place. But since we recorded that interview, there was the situation with Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin that the whole world was talking about, and Troy Vincent, in his capacity with the NFL, was asked numerous questions about. We thought it was only appropriate for us to get a comment from him before we started today's show. The comments that he made as it relates to Damar Hamlin were fairly simple. He went on to say that while the game is guided by policy, best practices, and guidelines, the only guideline that mattered that night was the health and wellness, the life of Damar Hamlin. He expanded upon that and said the emergency action plan was executed to perfection by those who rehearse, practice, and train for in-stadium health emergencies. And closed by acknowledging that we need to recognize the power of prayer by players, coaches, staff, and fans in the stadium and those watching around the world. We appreciate him taking the time to add that to today's episode of The Pulse. And now let's get right to our discussion with former NFL player and NFL executive Troy Vincent.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. Thank you for finding some time to speak with me.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure to have you on. And we'll start with you and I were having a conversation kind of before we got started. And I told you that in doing the research to talk to you, as a football fan, I thought I knew everything. But the more research I did, there's so much more that you've been involved in advocating for, even pre-football. Is it surprising to you that the more people talk to you, they kind of find out that there's a lot more than perhaps they knew?
No, I'm not surprised. And especially when in the world of athletics, when attrition and rosters and turnover, and we live in a society where the consumption of information is quick. You get what you want. You look at clickbait and then you move on, when I truly believe, though, that every individual, whether they're an athlete, influencer, doesn't matter, that everyone has a gravity of a foundation about who they are, what they truly represent. But most of the time, most aren't willing to do additional research or gather additional information to find out exactly what drives people. I'm not surprised, but it is one of the reasons actually why my wife and we created, just so that people can have a background information of myself, not self-promotion, but troyvincent.com. Oftentimes I'm speaking, doing hundreds of speaking engagements throughout the year, teaching classes, and you see people looking like, who is this guy again?
Yeah.
Where from? But it allows people to just get a little bit more information about who's in front of you or who you just heard from.
So that's really interesting that you start there, because I obviously was at troyvincent.com. And in reading it, a lot of times people's kind of life is linear, and you can start in a certain place. And in looking at that, I was like, where do we start? There's very much a faith first. There's very much you go back to your grandparents and kind of shaping you before some of us may have known you. Trenton, as you said, a local guy. Where do you start with kind of defining how you got started on this path?
I was raised by a World War II veteran in the city of Trenton, laborers, people that paid taxes, worked hard, and we made the best out of, our situation. That's who I am. And then I'm driven. I live a life of faith. I gave my life over to Jesus Christ at the age of 16 for several reasons. I fell in love with Jesus at that time, and those biblical principles has really helped guided me through my life. And then the coaching. I had the gift of athletics, where I was able to do things that other people couldn't do. That was a God-given ability that he allowed me to have during my time as an athlete. But the coaches and the people who influenced me the most, I can't forget about those individuals. So I have an appreciation for the coach and the impact, especially for those who are fatherless, or for those who may be missing something from their current father. The impact that the coach has on an individual's life. So, Bill, I said a whole lot to just say it's just so important for my children to know that we are standing on the shoulders of some great individuals from our family.
I want to talk NFL for just a minute because that may be why a lot of people, at least initially, know you. So through your career, you then went on to work in the front office, currently work in the front office of the NFL. Are you unique in kind of being that person who has a lot more going on in their life and things that they're working towards, particularly in kind of with athletes? Or do we need to take a longer look at who people are?
Bill, I would say I'm not unique at all. I just made some choices in life that just allowed me to put me in this position, but they were just simple choices that any athlete, male, female, doesn't matter what sport, frankly, any individual, and I share that all the time. I'm not unique. I just made some choices in life that allow me to put me in positions to still be part of the game that I love, to still father my children, to be a quality husband, and now a pop-pop, a grandfather. So I'm not unique.
Next on The Pulse, Troy Vincent explains why domestic violence is so deeply personal to him.
So I was around 7 or 8, and I was introduced to domestic violence through the sounds and the violence and the beating of my mother.
Being the 26th pick in the whole world, that comes with a cost. And for me, I didn't realize that cost.
We had Marcus Smith on with us not too long ago, and he was talking about his mental health challenges and how he is now an advocate. What I do think is unique is that more people in these high-profile positions are sharing their stories. And you're mentoring people in the NFL, to be human above being players. Is that unique, and do we need more of that?
I encourage everyone that could share their story, because our stories, our personal experiences are not for us. They're really for other people. Nothing's unique. It may just happen at a different time, at a different place, but someone has been down the road that or has experienced some things that I've experienced, and vice versa. We have a responsibility to share. And there were things painful time points in my life, painful experiences in my life that have become passion points that, as I matured, became part of I feel like my life's purpose. And one of those things is advocating and being an ally for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault.
Yeah.
I have a responsibility. I think we all as a society, in particular men, we have a responsibility to end violence against young women and girls. I made that commitment to my mother at the age of 16.
Both you and your wife have been very open about your personal experiences, but you talk about you gave your life to Christ at 16. You made a commitment to your mother at 16. Domestic violence was very personal to you. Share with us why this was such a personal situation for you that you committed to try to stop.
So I was around 7 or 8, and I was introduced to domestic violence through the sounds and the violence and the beating of my mother. In North Trenton, Dolly Homes was the projects that we had that lived in. And I used to wake up to the sounds in the middle of the night of my mother being beaten, thrown around the room. And, you walk out, you're underneath a bed, you go in the closet, and you're just waiting. It sounds like it's eternity. And you're just waiting for complete silence. That silence meant that either he left and it was over for that time. And you walk in, whether your mother's in the living room or the bathroom or in the bedroom or hanging out the window, puddle of blood, unconscious. So that was part of my life until I was in my mid-teens. No one, your neighbors, no one is helping you. You got 2 young boys knocking on a door for someone to help your mom, and people are turning their way. You hear them come up to the peek hole and then they turn back away. So this was my life, visiting my mother in the hospital, can't recognize her in emergency room. This was my life every single day for the vast majority of my teenage and my adolescence. It was at that age 16 where physically I felt like I can now challenge this individual to say, stop, don't put your hands on my mother anymore.
You and your brother tried to get help. Like, you went to neighbors, you went to different places, and people, they turned away.
Your silence implies that you're okay with it. And that was normal So I want you to think about that. And I'm not saying anything that anyone else they've probably experienced, but that was normal. See something, say nothing. So you look for help, you look for guidance. Obviously, my grandparents and everyone was trying to, hey, Mom, why are you staying? Why would you stay? But that's what she thought love was. I made a commitment to my mom that I would never be what I saw. I would never treat women or be what I saw. And I would be an ally for women and children until the Lord brings me home.
Your mother was beaten beyond recognition, and you were dealing with this as a child.
I fed my mother, or assisted in feeding my mother, I would say help, for years. And during that time in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, they were doing full facial casts. With a full facial cast, cut the eyeball so you can see, nose, and then mouth all wired up, jaw was broken, and you were feeding my mother through a tube, and cleaning off blood, dried up blood stains. So this was normal, and I used to share this when my mother, again, getting permission, because you want to get permission, because someone has to relive this when you tell that story. Once I got permission to share, people, no way, this can't be factual. Okay, then you go to Trent, you go to Jersey, and everyone knows he's absolutely correct.
Coming up, now domestic violence is obviously a key issue. So to Troy Vincent, no excuses accepted.
It's a choice. When I hear people say, well, he was this and well, she wore that, BS. It's a personal choice to harm someone. It's about power and control.
And by listening to experts in the domestic violence, child abuse, and the sexual assault communities, the more we've listened, the more we've learned and become more aware of these complexities, both of the problem and the solution. We believe that wearing the uniform of an NFL player is a privilege. It is not a right.
We live in a world of data. We talk about information around people and everyone has a death about themselves. But on the issue around domestic violence and sexual assault, it hasn't changed. The data says today that in the United States of America, every 9 seconds a woman is assaulted or beaten. The data says that 1 in every 3 women is abused in her lifetime. This data says that 10 million children a year will witness some form of domestic violence or sexual assault. That's what the data says, and it hasn't changed in decades. Every day, more than 3 women is murdered by their husbands or boyfriends. And then lastly, men are 2 times likely to abuse women, their wives or significant other, if they witness domestic violence as a child.
And those numbers have stayed the same since you were dealing with it in the 90s.
But that's
80s.
the problem.
Wow.
That means that we are okay with what we're seeing in our presence. And I just think violence amongst women and young girls, it's a choice. When I hear people say, well, he was this and well, she wore that, BS. Violence, that's a choice. That's a personal choice to harm someone. It's about power and control.
How do you break the cycle? Because that last statistic you talked about, twice as likely, 2 times more likely to repeat that cycle, you figured out a way to break it.
So that was being intentional and deliberate about how I spoke about women, how I engage with women, and even men around the conversation or the discussion. I don't laugh at jokes that demean women. I knew I didn't want to be what I saw. So daily modeling behavior of what I wanted to be, and there were a lot of positive men in my life, in particular my coaches, my grandfather. So I saw the goodness of people. I saw the goodness of men.
There was a period of time where we saw a lot of a lot probably is a stretch, but we saw high profile athletes involved in these types of situations. Statistically, is it more likely? Is it domestic abuse happening more often among athletes, or is that just something that we spend more time talking about because the people tend to be high profile?
Domestic violence, there is no class. There is no race. There's no it happens everywhere. But the athlete is where we can center. There's a center of attention, and we use the athlete as the example of, but there are men that are just in corporate America, whether they're working at a television station, they're working at the local grocery store, sanitation. This is occurring every day in every community.
So this isn't Troy Vincent, Executive Vice President, NFL, speaking on this because there is a problem among male athletes. This is Troy Vincent who is saying this is something that we have to own if we're going to fix this.
This is me, Troy Vincent, the son of Alma, the grandson of Julia and Jefferson, the husband of Tommy Vincent. This is me as a man, as a father, as a grandfather, looking for allyship, looking for other men to come alongside myself and others to end this vicious cycle.
Next, he is an executive with the NFL, but it's clear that just being in the room, that's just not enough.
You're a detriment to change. You're not saying anything. You're not putting forth possible solutions. You're not putting forth consideration and things that we should be. When you see wrong, you call it out.
Every member of the NFL community must embrace this unique leadership role that we play in our society.
I saw that you were one of the top 100 most influential Black executives. You're also high-ranking within the NFL. You have spoken out about minority opportunities, youth football trauma, CTE, all of these different domestic abuse, all of these different issues, and you're in the room to have these discussions that previously, maybe there wasn't a man speaking out against domestic abuse. Maybe there wasn't an achieving African American speaking out for the importance of minority opportunities. How important is it that you're actually in these rooms to have this voice?
One thing that we can't be is we can't be an armless chair. And me being an armless chair, what is that? We go, well, what do you mean by that? It is, you talk about being in the room and people say we're having a seat at the table. Well, we have many individuals who have a seat at the table, but they make no difference. They're okay with being the only one in the room. Mm-hmm. I'm not an armless chair. I'm intentional about humanity issues. I'm intentional about people. I'm intentional about winning where we could make money, but we still have to do right by people. And that doesn't change. But being in the room, and in my opinion, I just want people to at least respect what I have to say. It may not be what people want to hear, but I bring a different position and potentially a different perspective. And in particular here at the National Football League, I feel like my role was in football and in other issues that I have an opportunity to be part of or speak about, is to provide the commissioner with the information to allow him and his team to make an informed decision.
I like that, the armless chair concept. It's a really interesting way to think about it, because I think you're absolutely right. Regardless of industry, there are people who fight to get in the room, and then you get in the room. You're right. Well, I'm in the room, and my picture is on the hierarchy. I haven't really said anything. I haven't really changed anything. And now I'm in the room. My sole responsibility is to try to stay in the room.
You're a detriment to change. You're not saying anything. You're not putting forth possible solutions. You're not putting forth consideration and things that we should be. When you see wrong, you call it out in a respectful and professional manner. But you could be doing all of the good, the movement, all of the change. You could actually be hurting those efforts when you are not active.
But you and your wife are doing more in terms of mentoring young people. You're actively engaged in multiple charities.
We have our foundation. It's called Love Thy Neighbor. So that's ltncdc.org. For any, that's ltncdc.org. And we've really focused our efforts, say over the last decade in elementary education. We have a key, we call a key flagship activation at Super Bowl. We call it Safe Zone Activity Day. And each year in Super Bowl City, we adopt and partner with an elementary school to bridge that educational gap, to fill a gap of those educational needs for that particular school.
Use your voice for good is how we end every episode of The Pulse. We've been talking about that, I believe, for most of 30 minutes. But in a closing comment, what does use your voice for good mean to you?
Wherever you are, doesn't matter whether you're an athlete, you're a social worker, school teacher, scientist, we all have a platform. And we call that, I like to say, the power of one. And wherever you are and whatever you do and walk of life, it just takes the power of one to begin this multiplying good. When one person sees another person, typically it starts a chain reaction.
I've talked before to people about the fact that I struggle with the same thing that you were talking about. People who get in the room and they're just happy to be there. You're one of those people that I think that we all should be happy about the fact that you're in the room because you're changing the room and opening doors for more people to get into it and make some real substantive change. So I thank you. I appreciate you taking time with us. I was a fan of you as a football player before this, but now I'm just a fan.
Thank you for just a rich discussion. I appreciate you having me.
And thank you so much for watching The Pulse today. That was the kind of interview that I really enjoyed doing. Armless chair is something that I'm going to think on quite a bit, and hopefully you will as well. Want to remind you that you can get the full interview. All places podcasts are available. Just hit subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, hit me up on social media at BillAFox29. Again, thanks so much for watching. And I leave you, as I always do, reminding you that whenever you can, use your voice for good, and have a good one.